the Baen Free Radio Hour.
On the podcast, aliens wink in prime numbers, then disappear without a trace. What a wicked game to play to make us feel this way. Plus, we continue with the complete audiobook serialization of Son of the Black Sword by Larry Correia. All right now. Welcome to the Baen Free Radio Hour podcast. It's an honor to have you along. I'm Baen Senior Editor Tony Daniel. We talk with Michael Z. Williamson this time about his excellent short story collection, Tide of Battle. This contains stories from Mike Williamson's Freehold universe, fantasy that he and co-authors have written for Mercedes Lackey's Shared Universe anthology, and a great standalone novella set in the clan of the Claw universe. And there's some great nonfiction, incisive, hilarious. That's the way Mike Williamson rolls. So that's coming up. And we continue with the complete audiobook serialization of Larry Correia's great high fantasy novel, Son of the Black Sword. Now here's the news. Hey, something new and very cool will be available soon. Baen Books is proud to announce the sale of 13 new challenge coins. Inspired by the commemorative coin members of the armed forces give one another, and with the active participation of the authors, styled after some of our most popular military science fiction series, Baen offers Baen Challenge Coins. Hey, I have seen these. We have them framed in the office now, and they are super cool looking, really cool. And if you buy a set, we'll give you one for free, and the proceeds from that 14th Baen Book coin will go to help our veteran-oriented charities. We do Read Assist, which helps make books and other reading materials easily accessible to the disabled, including those disabled in combat, and Operation Baen Bulk, whose mission is to provide active duty soldiers with e-readers preloaded with dozens of titles. For more information on pricing or to pre-order the first run of Baen Challenge Coins for yourself, please visit Baen.com, where we have all the details on getting your coin on.
I want to welcome Michael Z. Williamson to the podcast. Hello again, Mike.
Hi there.
Michael Z. Williamson was born in England, based in Liverpool and Toronto, Canada, and now resides in Indianapolis with his children. He's retired military, having served 25 years in the U.S. Army and the U.S. Air Force, different times. He was deployed for Operation Iraqi Freedom and Operation Desert Fox. Williamson, that is Mike, is a state-ranked competitive shooter in combat rifle and combat pistol. His books set in his Freehold universe include Freehold and just a bunch of others. The series has two sub-series, with the latest entry being the novel Angel Eyes. He is also the author of Time Travel Novel, A Long Time Until Now. I really love that book, and is working on a sequel to that one. And he is the editor of Forged in Blood, an anthology of stories set in the Freehold universe that came out more recently. He's also the author of numerous short stories and nonfiction pieces and all kinds of other stuff. His first collection of these pieces is Tour of Duty, and now out of booksellers everywhere is Tide of Battle, which is another collection of great Michael Z. Williamson stories, essays, and humorous pieces. Mike, this is your second collection of stories. For a guy who's known for his novels, you sure write a lot of short stories. What attracts you to the form? You say a little bit about this in the introduction. How come you keep writing?
Money.
Yes, well.
Not just the money, but people keep asking, will you write a story for this anthology, and we'll pay you. It's like, well, sure, because I get to write a story. Some are more challenging than others, especially if it's in someone else's universe. But then I get paid, and then I get to put them into a collection. Some of them have been reprinted several times.
How are they different than? What's the creative process that's different about them, or is there?
Oh, yeah. Well, a short story, you've only got a finite number of words to get a character or characters, develop the background of these characters, present a conflict, have them resolve it, and hopefully, become more interesting characters in the process, and wrap it up. if you're in someone's existing universe, the benefit is that the background of the universe is already established, but you still have to establish character. And then you've got finite rules to work within that are already set there. If it's not an established universe, you've got more leeway, but then you have to put more background in very quickly.
Yeah. You say in the introduction to Type of Battle that you've gotten better at it over the years.
I think so.
That it didn't come naturally to you necessarily at first.
No, my first attempts at short stories were very long and clunky because I was basically trying to write short novels, and one of those was actually in the first anthology. That was The Price, which I'd written for John Ringo's Citizens Anthology. Actually, I'd written it before that, but before that I basically gutted the story of about 2/3 of the words, rewrote them much shorter and more concisely, and presented it better.
What was the one about the companion sentient jaguar like creature that to the soldier? Is that the one you were talking about, or?
No, that was in different. That was in Joe Haldeman's Future Weapons of War. That's Humans Called It Duty.
Yeah, that's a great story. However languagely you might be telling it.
Yeah. Well, I just sent you something else with that, so take a look.
Sure. Yeah, I've seen that.
And there's another anthology in the works, and it's set during the war with Earth and Freehold. And there is a story in there of the last surviving leopard handlers taking both their trained leopards and some of the ferals from the preserve, and depopulating a base late at night, 1 by 2 by 1. It's very well. It's not mine. It's somebody else wrote it for me in the universe, and it's very gripping. So the combat leopards seem to have a fan following.
Yeah, it's a wonderful, evocative story. It's sort of like the regard. It's strange. You really get into the mindset of how a cat must feel about its humans, I guess. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about Tide of Battle. The first story set was in a Rush tribute anthology. Oddly enough, yes. That is the band Rush. And it's about a kid who overcomes a pretty severe setback. Reminded me of How Spacesuit Will Travel and Starman Jones. Can you talk a little bit about the reason you wrote this and what it's about?
Yeah, I've known Kevin J. Anderson for a long time, and he's both a rock fan, a Rush fan, and he's friends with the band. So he proposed putting together an authorized collection of stories based on their music. And he'd asked on his Facebook page for people who, writers who were fans, and someone said, "Hey, Mike Williamson's a huge Rush fan." So he emailed me, and I said, "Yeah, sure. That sounds great." I picked one of the songs, and then by the time I was done, it was actually 2.5 songs had sort of crept in there concept-wise. And of course, the band has always been huge sci-fi fans. There's a lot of sci-fi themes in the music, in the lyrics. So in the intro to that, I referenced which ones were influenced in some way or another, so people can look them up and listen.
Talk about the kid. He's really a winning character.
He always wanted to go into space. He always wanted to get away from people and the constraints of Earth. It's always been his dream. Gets bashed up in a accident of his own. Not intentionally, but his own actions got him into a bad accident, and then basically insists to himself that that's not going to stop him. I've always, admired determination and success of people who, know what they want to do and accomplish it.
Yeah, he pushes through some pretty severe setbacks, and they have a science fiction tinge to them as well. I was trying to picture his eyes, which probably were pretty shocking looking, or are meant to be.
Yeah, I was trying to decide if I was going to go with regrown eyes, and I finally decided that given some of the brain damage that he was going to have an actual prosthesis to interface. And of course, we know one of the scientists who works on this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Which let me it gave me the idea to take the story in that direction.
That scientist we know is Rob Hansen and Dr. Ted Roberts is one of his students. He's written many things for our website as well.
Mm-hmm.
And we've had him on the podcast.
If there's ever a zombie apocalypse, he probably caused it.
And well, at least we'll have the details of how to solve it, perhaps in a general science sort of way in a Baen article. That's a great opener. Maybe my favorite story of yours ever is Soft Casualties because it's so insidious. It's set in the Freehold universe. It makes one look at sausage in a whole new light. Can you talk about this? Maybe talk about the idea of asymmetric warfare and
that came about. I was talking to a friend in the AIM Baen Bar chat room who's unfortunately no longer with us, and he and I were kicking around very low-tech, low-cost PSYOP techniques for making an enemy very, very unhappy with their existence. And that was one I came up with, and he just started laughing. He said it is just, horribly evil and diabolical. That'll be incorporated into the wartime anthology as part of what goes on. Basically, the entire system is in resistance and rebellion to being invaded. It's not just a military issue. It's a case that everybody is rebelling. And, what do people who don't have a huge amount of training or equipment available do? And well, you go after the enemy's morale. You do everything you can. In previous wars, people have drugged food, poisoned food. They've gone after water supplies. I was trying, how can we escalate that to make people afraid to even eat? And came up with a couple ways, and that one was fun.
Yeah. What other vile ideas for asymmetric warfare have you come up with? Maybe
several were mentioned in Freehold and the Weapon. If you take massive response back behind the lines to areas the enemy is convinced are safe. And of course, after I wrote all that, then that type of stuff started happening in the events in Iraq and Afghanistan. They didn't just go after the combatant troops, they went after the bases and the supply chains, and that's exactly what I would expect to happen.
Well, the other thing about your Freehold world is that this is a planet that has loose alliances, semi-libertarian, Grayan, and it's not liked by the UN, and our character in Soft Casualty is a UN soldier who'd really rather be anywhere else in the world, right? I mean, the universe, besides stationed on this shithole he thinks of it.
I've noticed, when I've been deployed, most troops are trying everything they can to at least maintain the illusion and the semblance of being home. It was hard to find local music to listen to, and I love learning things, even if I'm traveling in a military context. What's this local culture about? I could identify some of, because I play guitar and I've got some background with that, I could listen to some of the music, and even though I had no idea what they were singing, I could go, this was done in the mid-1970s, judging from the guitar, the amp, and the recording technique. And I had no idea what some of the stuff was. And there were a couple songs I knew just barely enough Arabic to grasp that the chorus was repetitive and sappy. So it's just as stupid as some of our pop songs. But because it was Arabic, well, I didn't have to listen to the lyrics, so I could enjoy it. The first time I went over for Operation Desert Fox, I was with an engineer unit that was basically bedding down 2,000 troops, and we were only there for a few weeks. We went in, did the mission, got back out. In Kuwait, we got combat pay, but there was nothing actually going on at the time. It just happened that there was the bare possibility of a rocket attack that never happened. But we were very restricted on where we could go. The issue there was that the Army could go off base. The Air Force couldn't, because if you're off base and you're Air Force and someone catches you as a hostage, the assumption is that you must be a pilot and you must know some secrets, even though most of the Air Force doesn't actually fly planes. And I couldn't tell you anything technically about aircraft because I worked on mechanical equipment and runways. So the Army got passes into town, into Kuwait City. We didn't. So I didn't get to try any local food. I didn't get to. But so many of them wanted to play video games and stay on base and pretend that there wasn't a foreign culture out there at all. And that seems to be very common in a lot of armies, both contemporary and throughout history. The goal is not to acknowledge, that either the potential enemy are people, or that you're not where you'd much rather be instead. So that played into it.
Yeah. Well, he certainly jinxed himself by doing that. So, Star Home, the next story in the anthology, it's really complex and nuanced. I like it. We used it on the Baen.com website to as a run up to Angel Eyes, I believe. You talk about micronations in your introduction. How is Star Home a micronation?
So this is an abandoned, inflated asteroid used as a jump point control station. As things drifted, as technology improved, a closer, more sophisticated one was built. This one was abandoned, and someone occupied it, which some people might recognize is somewhat similar to the background of Sealand, which is a former defensive gunnery platform that the Royal Navy abandoned and that somebody occupied and declared possession of, which these days operates as a huge anonymous server farm. It's contracted out. I wanted something a little more habitable than that because that's tiny, smaller than this house. And then I'd been studying micronations in general for another writing project. So what is the minimum you need in order to be a national entity? Well, distance helps, because if you're further away, and distance doesn't have to be physical distance, it can be, distance for travel and communication. Your odds are much better that people are going to leave you alone because you don't offer anything that they need or anything that's cost effective for them to get. So this is a rock in the middle of deep space in our system that is used as a cheap waypoint for smaller shipping firms that can't afford docking fees. Same way airports and harbors have docking fees, so do space stations. So they carry a lot of smaller, lighter traffic, and then they get disrupted by the war because traffic is restricted, availability of everything changes, and that's all they have for income. That's the only only service they have to sell, which is also a problem for a nation if you have limited resources to exploit. And in this case, all they have is docking services and support. Then if anything interferes with that, you've got significant issues.
And then along comes the Starship with
someone
may not be doing what they. Yeah.
Well, they're scientists. They're actually doing research, and that's a convenient place to do research from. Who else uses the information the scientists get is, and science is always available one way or another to outside parties.
Yeah. And
someone comes along and offers them money, and they have to decide between taking the money or starving to death. So, what's your choice?
That's an interesting part of the story. Is the idea of Jackson Bates, who's the main character, runs the place. He's the president. This idea that he's preserving a legacy, but he also is trying to face up to the realities of finance. So he actually sort of thinks of it as a nation, right?
Oh yeah, it's a tiny little nation, but or you could think of it as a city-state. But he's got people he's responsible for. He doesn't want to just throw them out into without some kind of choice on their part or some kind of option. So he's trying to persist as long as possible.
What's the history of it? What is it? His dad or somebody, or he sort of inherited
grandfather, if I recall. Yeah.
So there is it's almost like an old company that's with a lot of employees, and nobody knows where they're going to go if they can't work here.
I've seen some very legitimate, honest, well-run companies who simply got completely bypassed by technology. Look at the Swiss watchmakers when cheap digital watches came out. The goal then had been, you got a Swiss watch because they were finely made and very accurate, and then here comes digital watches that are cheaper and just as accurate. And the initial response was, yeah, but nobody will want those because they're cheap and ugly. And, well, everybody bought them because they were cheap and they were willing to deal with the ugly. The Swiss finally, all those little companies, most of them are 5, 10 employees, they're little family businesses, they finally managed to reconfigure them as status symbols and art rather than as just necessities. And then, of course, they had knockoffs getting made in the Far East to deal with. So
we've sometimes in publishing we wondered if hardcovers are going to become sort of niche, like vinyl.
My thought was that hardcovers will stay in production as collectibles and for first acquirers, but it's looking more and more at my royalty statements as if downloads are displacing paperbacks to an extent, and possibly to a larger extent.
That is that's the conventional wisdom that ebooks are going to take the place of mass markets, which is true to an extent, but it hasn't destroyed publishing quite the way that the MP3s really wreaked havoc in the music industry. But anyway,
well, 15 years ago, most publishers other than Baen didn't want electronic publishing because, well, that was the end of publishing, rather than simply one more venue to exploit and profit from.
Yeah. As far as I'm concerned, a Mike Williamson book is a Mike Williamson book.
I don't care how someone pays for it. John Wingo and I joked on a panel at one point. We weren't exactly joking. The dedicated reader should have a hardcover for their collection and attempt to get it signed, and they should have a paperback for reading their leisure, and it's fair to give to friends. And then they should have a download that they can read on their tablet, phone, or other device while traveling, and the audiobook edition that they can listen to while they're driving their car. So everyone should have 5 or 6 copies of each book.
Yes, and they should also have a dedicated e-reader that they get signed on the back by their very favorite authors. That has the actual file that is their file, and it never gets erased on it as well. There's another version. Well, let's talk about your perhaps first big space battle. I don't know if it's the first one, but it's a big one, and it's a great story. Hate in the Darkness. Can you explain?
And that's in your collection,
right there. Yeah, and Star Destroyers, which is out from Baen, that Christopher Rocchio and I edited. In your universe, there are jump points, and there are ships that are slower. Use another kind of FTL. Can you explain the setup for that story?
Yeah, the jump points are the early ones are set up the slow way. They actually had to send the initial ones. They had to send a sublight ship through its positioning point at the other end. As technology improved, they were able to either go around the long way or open remotely. And these are established positions a ship can use. Think of it like a freeway ramp. The phase drive, which is just coming into existence, the Freehold's time point in the universe, uses more energy, is more expensive to build, that can be operated effectively anywhere, although the closer you are to a gravity well, the harder it is. So people are reluctant to use them close to stars or planets. But they're perfectly viable further out. And, of course, as technology improves, that will also evolve. So they can go anywhere, but there's few of them. They're very expensive, and they're more expensive to use. So what I've got in the wartime is that the few of those the Freehold forces have, they basically use for shuttling around other ships to engage in combat. Rather than risking them as frontline combatants, they're shuttling around reconnaissance ships that set up observation posts in other systems. They're shuttling around warheads, special operations forces, logistical supplies, because they can go literally anywhere. If you're driving on a freeway, there's all this land next to you that you can't get off the freeway and do anything with or to from your car. Someone who's in a very effective off-road vehicle can drive along there, and they're unreachable to you, even though they're not necessarily very far away. So I've got a phase drive ship moving a smaller combat ship into the Earth system proper to engage in clandestine stealthy attacks, and then it'll be recovered at the other end.
And our heroes, our main characters, are on a phase drive ship.
Yes.
That is discovered and has to fight UN forces.
And that was there's both historical parallels in submarine warfare, and then there's the famous first generation Star Trek episode where they meet the Romulans with their cloaking device. How do you find something you can't see? So the first thing I had to establish is, well, why can't you see something in space? Because there's no horizon, and there's no obstacles to hide behind. It's hard to disappear in space, which is one of the big problems any space combat story should be addressing, and a lot of them don't. There's possibly a light speed lag in weapons effectiveness, and there's eventually, if you're using a beam weapon, there's degradation of the beam, and missiles may have a limited thrust range, but if you're visible, you can be targeted. There's nothing that you can use to obscure your presence, other than to have very little signature of any kind and rely on the fact that you're a very small point.
You have in the story, the captain has some say, but they generally, and it really felt realistic to me in such a situation. The weapons officer, the Malin Metzger, is
astrogator.
He's sort of a yeah, he's the math guy. He's the astrogator, which is what this kind of space warfare requires. Was
the basis of his job in this is very simple. The implementation is the hard part. The basis is just stay out of range of anything that can shoot us. First, don't let them find us. If they do find us, avoid their weapons, and then eventually get out of the range of their weapons so they can't do anything to us. So it would work well as a tabletop role-playing game, because what you're looking at is, if this ship survives this number of rounds, it's a win.
Yeah, and he sort of is thinking about it. What's interesting about him is, and the situation is the way that the captain sort of defers to him. Did you conceive of this as part of like grand culture, or is it? And it's something the situation requires.
Some of that is actually Air Force engineer culture, because the different branches operate different ways. The primary need of an airbase in a combat zone is the flight line. If the flight line is not operating and you're not launching aircraft, you're one, not participating in the battle, and two, you're a defenseless target. The way an airbase defends itself is with fighter aircraft. So, and it was a question I posed. We were discussing how military culture works in different branches, and in the Army, it's very, very strict by rank in most cases. I point out to a friend who's done a lot of Army combat service, if the flight line is damaged, the person in charge is the most experienced person in that field. There's no point in anyone else having an opinion because they can't do anything to it. So if the airfield is damaged, the base commander defers to the base civil engineer, whose job is to bring that flight line up. And if that means shutting other missions down temporarily to get that going, that's what it means. I assume the Navy similar aboard aircraft carriers. you've got to get the flight line up, you've got to have aircraft launching, or you're not doing anything. And the people in charge of that are the ones who have that particular specialty. So if you're on the runway and they need to fix a crater, then the crater boss is the guy who's been to the crater repair school. It doesn't matter what rank anyone else is, that's the guy who's going to get the job done.
That's really what he's concentrating on, and even his, you get the feeling that if he wins at the end, he's just going to be satisfied. He's not going to be like rejoicing or anything. He's going to be satisfied at he thought it through and he did it right,
And they survived.
That kind of guy.
Yeah. They didn't get blown up, freeze to death, or suffocate from power being exhausted. Yeah.
And they pulled one over on those damn UN people. So,
question was, after you get the attack in, how do you get out unseen?
Yeah.
The attack's not the issue. The survival's the issue.
They're in an underdog situation the entire time. They've entered the hornet's nest, as it were.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we're going to start gassing her from the inside.
It's a cool story. After the Freehold stories, we switched to some fantasy tales, which is interesting, especially for readers who haven't read a whole lot of your fantasy tales. A flower grows in Whitechapel's a touching stand. A lot of these you've done in Mercedes Lackey universes. Can you sort of explain that relationship and then maybe talk about Melee, Mehua, that is. And the first story.
This is the Elemental Masters universe. I was vaguely familiar with this first time we wrote in it. And this was written with my ex-wife, who's quite a talented writer. I asked her to help because she's more familiar with the universe. And I've commented in the forwards, there's a couple of bits where she managed to tie actual historical events in. And so did I, but she went into a little more detail. I've known Misty since before I started publishing with Baen. We've been swapping emails on a couple of issues. We basically, at this point, we talk in person in public at events. We don't really correspond much. We're vastly diametrically opposed politically, and neither of us wants to irritate the other, so there's a détente there. But I've written in both Valimar Universe regularly, and then there was a break where they did 2 years of Elemental Masters, which is an early 20th century urban fantasy universe. And you asked about the character. So
how did the LR? So there's this sort of school for orphans that this girl shows up at. She's brought there.
She's an orphaned waif, and the elementals bring her there and leave her in the care of these magic users. And it turns out that she's got her own talents. There's been lots of stories with this kind of theme. In this case, her talent is breeding plants and causing them to grow, which doesn't sound like it's all that interesting or of much use, but it turns out that, plants have all kinds of properties that, plants can be medicine, they can be poison, they can be cover, and her talent is exploiting that. Mm-hmm.
Perhaps. You also have a couple of stories from Lackey's Valdemar series anthologies.
Yes.
The first one of those is about coming of age and learning to contain power. What's the setting there?
That's that part of that universe. It's sort of a high fantasy medieval, although some of the cultures are much more similar to Native American. Some of them are much more similar to Central Asian. So there's a broad mix of cultures that are available. And the Cheyenne in this, they're a plains Indian sort of culture with that have access to iron weapons. So what would happen if iron had been exploited in North America is the kind of culture they have. And then interacting with the rest of that established universe. So yeah, it's coming of age. The young man has a betrothed back home. He's being taught to control his magical abilities. She's irritating back home and shows up with the livestock. And then at this point, these two are, because we covered that in the previous story, the two of them are reunited and have to deal with a variety of socio-political issues as teenagers, which is bewildering, eye-opening, and leads to, a fire in the grass.
Yeah, there's a feel of maybe steppes. It's not the same culture, but there's a feel of shamanic Siberian and that as if it were in America, I guess. It's a cool story. There's a couple of them set there. I don't want to leave without mentioning also the other shared world anthology that you have a story in that's in this book is John Ringo's Black Tide Rising universe, which is a great story too, especially for those who either are sympathetic to or preppers themselves.
I felt stupid for a while.
Grandpa.
Yeah, I'd had that rough concept of a story in the back of my head, as a part humor thing. And John said he wanted a story, and I was reading the first book to, get actual detail, because I'd heard a lot about it, but you actually have to read it. And, interesting book, well done. Great presentation on how such a plague would spread. It's like, well, what am I going to write? I mean, there's all kinds of stuff I could write. Oh! I've got that story about the crazy grandpa. That would work here. So yeah, everyone thinks Grandpa's crazy and over the top until the zombie uprising actually happens. It's like, well, how could we know?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting the way that it seems to me that the way you wrote it was you start in the son's point of view, who's kind of sympathetic because he loves his granddad, but he also is like, oh man, I gotta get this guy to stop buying food and weapons and tone it down. And then you switch over to Grandpa's point of view after the zombies come. He's like, these kids, man, it's really a wonderful
actually
sort of.
I actually had a discussion sort of like that. I got called up in the Guard for the Mississippi flood in '93. And we flew in, and I'm looking down from the helicopter. It's like, oh, it doesn't look too bad. And the flight engineer says, oh, no, that's not the river. The river's 30 miles west of here. It's like, me. Wow. Okay, that is bad. So we land, and we're doing I start off with lots of sandbagging. Later on, I moved to a water distribution point and managed that. Lots of very disorganized sandbagging, even though the public affairs people were insisting that everything was under control. And we geared up, boots, gloves, rain hats, and there's always someone who's officious and overly detail-oriented in the military, and they insisted we couldn't wear bandanas or do-rags because they didn't look professional. We were just trying to keep the sun off our necks. And boonie hats were not authorized, and this wasn't authorized. And my comment was, they don't care if we're wearing pink blanking tutus as long as we're throwing sandbags. They don't care what we look like. The Missouri Guard turned out, and they were all wearing T-shirts with the sleeves ripped off. They looked pretty disreputable, but you're wading in mud, so who cares? So I'm standing there in formation in the morning in my gear, and I've got this huge Bowie knife on my gear because I carry a knife. Shocking as that might be to some people, I carry a knife everywhere I go. And the acting first sergeant mutters to me, after formation, I don't want to see that knife again. I'm like, yes, first sergeant. So I put it in my duffel bag, locked it up, and at some point during the day, a helicopter dropped a palletized bale of sandbags to us that was wrapped in steel cargo vans. Now, the typical way of opening these is to whack them with a shovel, and the band breaks. That only works if you've got a hard structure underneath. If it's unfilled sandbags, it just bounces as a spring. And they're prying at it with pliers and pulling at it, and it won't break. So I pulled out my pocket knife, and I jabbed my pocket knife into one of the band restraints and jammed down on it, and I broke the tip off the knife. And I looked at him and said, if I had my Bowie, we would not be having this discussion. I'm carrying the Bowie from now on. So I'm not asking. I'm informing you that I will be carrying that Bowie from now on. So next morning I had it on my gear, and nobody said a word. You know, because it was a big enough knife, I could have put it underneath and just yanked and snapped the steel banding. But we weren't going to do it with pocket knives or pliers or... You know, as I've said, people say, you know, when all you have a hammer is a hammer, all your problems look like nails. It's like, but when the problem is a nail, you can't hit it with your hand or your shoe without messing yourself up. You need a hammer.
Yeah. And a guy with the moxie to actually carry it along.
Yeah. And there's a lot of times in the field, you know, whether you're military or civilian, a big knife is the tool to have because it does so much. So, yeah, this is the grandpa who's got the big knife and some extra guns and a few more extra guns and some MREs and some tents and some winter survival clothing and water purification gear. And it's like, enough, Grandpa? I'm like, no, it's never enough. And then the zombies came.
But I love in the introduction you say, you know, how people say, well, I'm coming to your place after the apocalypse, and you're like, who said you're welcome?
Yeah. Well, Jim Rawls, who runs Survival Blog, where I'm contributing editor-at-large, you know, I know where he lives. There's probably no more than a dozen people on Earth who know where he lives, because he's known as the disaster preparedness and survival guru. And he doesn't want entire, you know, Winnebago caravans showing up at his place in the great unnamed western states, as he puts it, you know, if something disastrous does happen. So there's a very few handful of us who he knows aren't going to do that.
Yeah. So can I call you and ask you where he is at that point?
I can recommend places closer to you.
Okay.
On the other end of the spectrum, there's actually a couple of preparedness groups who have websites who list what they keep on hand as far as emergency supplies and equipment, and their grid coordinates and GPS location. So this is an invitation. And one of them even says, oh, we don't have firearms because we don't believe in violence. Like, so are you advertising the fact that someone should show up and loot you for everything they need?
Wow.
Yes, you're advertising the fact that someone should show up and loot you. Yeah.
Well, I do a little bit of holding up with stuff. My wife thinks I'm amusing. She's not going to one day, goddammit. She's going to be glad.
Well, my new wife, girlfriend for quite some time, my new wife, I live with my wife and children now. Out behind the house, thanks, that was October. Outside the fence up the hill is a chicken coop, and this weekend we were helping her add a rabbit hutch. And she refers to one of them as a meat mutt. It scratched her hand yesterday, so that's the first rabbit that's going to be turned into stew or roast or something here in the next few days. And I've got a dear friend for a long time, who's very vegetarian. It's like, oh, you're raising rabbits? You know, you're raising bunnies? I said, well, we're raising rabbits. Oh, well, what are their names? I guess we could call them Hassenpfeffer and roast and fricassee. And I could never eat a pet. Well, they're not pets. That's why they don't have names. If they were going to be pets, they'd have names, and they'd live closer to the house. But they're up the hill where they're tended to enough to keep them healthy and comfortable, and periodically one of them winds up in the pot. The whole point.
That's right. Delicious.
Tastes like chicken.
So the biggest part of the book, or a big part of the book, is the novella Battlestide. This is from Clan of the Claw, I believe.
Yes.
The Bill Fawcett created little.
Yes.
I guess it's a series now. So this is a really interesting alternate past sort of thing. Can you explain what world we're in here?
Bill had originally helped put together what eventually became The Hero, and I did a contemporary trilogy through him for HarperCollins and a couple other things. He's great to work with. One of the few last gentlemen in the business.
Yeah,
and he
long,
said, "I got a
friend of Baen." Yeah.
Yes, yeah. He says, "I've got a shared universe I'm putting together. It's alternate Bronze Age. I need 30,000 words with lots of combat in it. Can you do that?" It's like, "Oh yeah, sure. That sounds like a blast. All right, I'll send you the Bible and the first 2 stories." So he sends me the background on this universe and the technology available. So it's an alternate universe where the dinosaurs didn't go extinct, but evolved back down to more manageable size than the megafauna. And mammals also evolved, and the felines became the dominant species. And we have the Messinian salinity crisis. So this is the Mediterranean being almost completely empty. Realistically, the bottom is not habitable. The temperatures would be up around 180. The pressure would be significant. Nothing would live there. For dramatic purposes, it's not quite that deep. The bottom is habitable, but very tropical. And then over on the west side, it's supposed to be the west side, the ocean opens up and it starts filling in this basin. And he specified the technologies available to the cats and to the reptiles. And then I read the first 2 stories he'd gotten, which were from Harry Turtledove and F.M. Sterling. It's like, wow, having my name in a book with these gentlemen is rather flattering. Because they're huge names in the business. And because of the way Harry had done his story, we went ahead and flipped the landmass east for west. So it's not an exact parallel to the Mediterranean. But his story required it to go the other way, so the whole universe was flipped. Which is the great thing about writing science fiction. We can change the world. Okay. Same story.
It's an alternate. So yes. There's reptilian intelligence, humanoidish, and they have a mental control.
Yes,
it's sort of magic, but probably not magic.
Over they developed a psi power that works, to various extents on various creatures. They're very good with each other. It's harder to control intelligent other species. It's very easy to control unintelligent species. So their ruling species has others doing all the labor.
Yeah. And our heroes sort of are the cat people, or the Rim.
Yes.
Who have something like a defense, which also brings into play the problem of Amazons, right, or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the females are more resistant, and they traditionally haven't had female combatants, so they need to have a workaround to develop this. So they've got right at the end they have I called them spear-carrying cheerleaders supported by bagpipes. That's how I wanted to do it.
Well, it's pretty interesting. The whole way that it works with their culture and you work it out is really cool in the story. We also have a portion of the book, of course, that is nonfiction, and you have some serious stuff, like an article on the history of gun regulation, and a long article on the kind of research you did to write your novel about the time travel book.
A long time ago now. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And there's lots of humor. So to ask you a question you posed, why can't anyone watch a movie with you, Mike?
I remember one time,
especially it seems
we were watching
a cartoon.
We're watching Pink Floyd's The Wall, and it starts off with the song "When the Tigers Broke Free" and "One Miserable Morning in Black 44." And here comes a Stuka dive bomber, and my father and I both go, the Germans didn't have any Stukas left by 44. I was like, would you just watch the movie and stuff? What? There's any number of ways they could have done it, but they couldn't use a Stuka. And we will mercilessly tear movies apart. And my poor ex-wife always felt compelled to defend people when I would try and tear a movie apart. They're like, look, they're wrong, and they can't hear you. There's no reason to defend them. But, I didn't find that to be a problem. I felt rather sorry for having to defend someone against my outrage and technical knowledge. Any movie with firearms in it, I'm sitting there face palming.
Yeah,
everything.
Well, you also have some
firearms.
You also have some interesting political analyses of movies like, stories like Robin Hood or
yes.
Madagascar.
No, it was Madagascar, and Over the Hedge. Yes. Yeah, there's political subtext there that most people may have missed, so I'm glad I could bring it to their attention.
Yeah. You really have us rooting for the bad guys by the end of the movie. Which we all sort
Everyone
of
should.
Anyway. Yes, exactly.
Well, look at the Star Wars movies. I mean, you look at the Empire in the Star Wars movies, and the Empire got rid of the excessive bureaucracy, the excessive corporatism, and did in fact balance the Force by getting rid of those meddling Jedi who thought they had the right to control everybody's destinies. The Empire are the good guys.
That's true. Radical.
To a point.
A radical egalitarian. Get rid of those damn Force-using 1%.
And then the lesson there is that they displaced the Jedi and had to assume their role, and then the same thing happened all over again.
It seems like there's nothing you could do to not be evil once you're at a certain. Well, maybe Google should learn something from.
Evil has so much more character. It was an okay movie, but it had a great line that when they did Dudley Do Right as a live action. And Snidely Whiplash at the end says, right up until the end, being the bad guy's the best job in the world.
Yes. Well, every actor wants to play the Bond, that one. Sure.
Yeah.
So, you also are an advice columnist in another life. A rather droll. And this one you do as Mad Mike. Who is Mad Mike?
Right. The biggest thing that amuses me online, first of all, is Twitter doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the president posts on Twitter. It doesn't matter what anyone posts on Twitter. It doesn't matter. And people would be much happier if they just didn't pay attention to it. I did a blog post a couple of days ago. I called it the 2-minute hate. Something goes on Twitter, everyone gets outraged, and then very quickly they find something else to get outraged about, and it's like, stop wasting your time. And you can't have a productive conversation in 140 characters anyway. I post all kinds of stuff on Facebook, and sometimes I'm just trolling. There's a small number of people who seem to believe everything I post is everything I believe, and I'm, some sort of wannabe supervillain monster. I'm quite happy on my chunk of land, and not quite in the middle of nowhere, with my family and the pets and edible animals. So I do advice column. Ask Mad Mike, and someone asks a question. It's like, well, how can I tweak this for shock factor? What can I post here just to throw a bomb into everything?
Yeah. Well, you also, you can always. You are incredibly tongue-in-cheek, but it's always pretty clear that that's what you're doing when you toss out one of these bomb
apparently
moths.
There's a large number of people who don't get satire, and
Well, you make fun of everyone equal opportunity. You make fun of gun nuts, of which you are one, and the left and the right gets it from Williamson. And finally, you close out the book with another list. Yes, and libertarians.
Yeah.
Inappropriate cocktails. Yes. What are a couple of your favorites there? Do you remember any of them?
In this one?
Or any of them that you...
Well, one of the first ones I came up with was the Baby Seal, which is Canadian Club and Club Soda on the rocks with a handful of squeezed Coke sugar and a bloody red splash of grenadine, and you stir it with a wooden stick, which is actually a very, very tasty cocktail. We came up with that, and I was like, but this actually really tastes good. Man, this should be a thing. The Club and Club on the rocks is what makes it work. I thought I came up with a really good one for Powers Booth. Kool-Aid with Southern Comfort, since he played Jim Jones and in the movie Southern Comfort. And that's actually, can be fairly tasty.
Yeah. That was a good one. What is it? What I saw that? Well, I won't try to go through them and pick one out, but you have a lot of great ones in here. I think just a lot of your books are fairly serious in tone. The fact that you are also hilarious might come as a shock to some readers, a very happy shock. And it's a really good reason.
Except for the ones who take it personally. Yeah.
Well, we'll have to let them be where they are. So, what are you working on now? Are you working on the new time travel novel, or is it on to other things?
I'm 75,000 words into that. But I'm working on the time travel story. I'm working on the next anthology, which is during the war, and it's going to be interspersed stories. It's actually some of the authors are coming back. Larry Correia, Brad Torgerson's going to be in this one. And the book is developing the same way an actual rebellion would. The early stories are not very coordinated. It's like whatever these people can do to resist the invasion. And as it gets rolling, it gets organized, and they get their own intelligence network. And then the Freehold equivalent of 4chan gets involved, and everybody's networks go down. It's looking to be a lot of fun.
Well, this is the sequel to Force and Blood we're talking about.
Yeah, it's not particularly a sequel, but it's another in-universe anthology.
Other writers writing in the Freehold universe.
Using Larry's story, which he ran the idea past me, and I thought it was fantastic. And I summarized it. You've fallen for one of the classical blunders. The first, as everyone knows, is to get involved in a land war in Asia. The second, and only slightly less well known, is never invade a nation that has an assassins guild.
Always a bad idea. Well, that's going to be great, and we're looking forward to that. And out now at booksellers everywhere is a entirely Williamson collection. It's called Tide of Battle: Stories and Provocations by Michael V. Williamson. It's available at booksellers everywhere. Thank you so much for being with us and talking about this, Mike.
Sure. I always enjoy it.
Now we continue with the complete audiobook serialization of Son of the Black Sword by Larry Correia, Book 1 in the Saga of the Forgotten Warrior. After the War of the Gods, the demons were cast out and fell to the world. Mankind was nearly eradicated by the seemingly unstoppable beasts, until the gods sent the great hero Ram Rowan to save them. He united the tribes, gave them magic, and drove the demons into the sea. But as centuries passed, the descendants of the great hero grew in number and power. They became tyrannical and cruel, and their religion nothing but an excuse for greed. The people rose up, and the surviving royalty and their priests were made casteless, condemned to live as untouchables. The age of law had begun. Ashok Vidal has been chosen by a powerful ancient weapon to be its bearer. He is a protector, a member of an ancient military order of roving law enforcers. No one is more merciless in rooting out those who secretly practice the old ways as Ashok. But Ashok isn't who he thinks he is. And when he finds himself on the wrong side of the law, The consequences lead to rebellion, war, and perhaps transformation. Now here is the latest entry in Larry Correia's Son of the Black Sword.
The heat was so intense that it was difficult to even approach the growing fire. A black shape shot between the storehouse and a burning shack. Ashok would have followed it directly, but his skin was not nearly as impervious as that of his prey. Despite the fact that they lived their lives beneath the waves, fire didn't seem to harm demons. Ashok ran along the shore, leaping from rock to rock, looking for a path through the flames. Unclean salt water soaked his boots, and he cursed the fools who would build a village in such a tainted place. Most of the residents had fled or died. Now the demon was just toying with the stragglers, feasting before it returned to the depths. They'd always struck him as spiteful that way. He spotted the demon again as it leapt over a rope bridge, but then he lost it in the smoke. The air scorched his eyes as he started up a narrow ramp after it. Ashok paused to tie a scarf over the lower half of his face in a vain attempt to strain the air. It made sense that the creature would have the advantage here. Demons could breathe air or water, and in comparison to that, what trouble was smoke? Ashok selected a path and pushed on through the maze of connected huts and scaffolding. The bridge was flimsy and rocked wildly as he ran across. He reached a solid platform, and a lucky shift of the wind granted him a lungful of decent air and a clear view. A few coughing survivors pushed past him to climb down the ladders. One desperately leapt over the side to fall into the black waves. It was foolhardy to ever touch hell. But it was shallow enough here that nothing immediately tried to devour that worker. Tonight the ocean's nightmares were on dry land. He had been taught that the best way to track a demon was to follow the signs of chaos. Wherever demons went, they left carnage in their wake. They were the living embodiment of destruction. Sword in hand, Ashok moved down the platform, following the trail of blood and discarded body parts. Demons never stopped moving, and they liked to carry their victims' bodies as they bounded from place to place, gnawing on them until they found someone else to rip into. Once they'd gorged themselves, and their bellies were stuffed full, they would usually pause long enough to vomit up what they'd just eaten in order to make room for more. There was a foot, still wearing a sandal. There were several severed fingers on top of a pile of unidentifiable organs. He was on the right path. The trail led down another narrow bridge. The cracks between the boards revealed crashing surf below. The only thing separating his body from the evil sea was some rickety stilts and rotting wood. It was strange enough to make even a man without fear pause. How could anyone, even the lowest of the low, live like this? Then the wave retreated, revealing shining sand, and his confidence returned. This largest group of platforms was kept purposefully separate from the rest. This was the oldest and most confusing part of the village, with huts and structures haphazardly built in layers on top of each other for generations. It didn't matter which house's territory he was in. Castless quarters always felt similar, giving off an air of disintegrating, shoddy construction and general filthiness. The law mandated that the living area of the untouchables be kept separate from that of the whole men. Bits of glowing ash were falling from the dark sky, and several buildings in the castless quarter had caught fire. Ashok took cover behind the corner of a hut and listened. Something was screeching. It was a horrible, blood-curdling sound. He hoped the demon had attacked a piglet, because that sound should not ever come out of a human throat, no matter how low in status the human might be. Keeping Angruvadal low at his side, Ashok stalked toward the darkened barracks where the cry came from. There was a sickening crack, and the noise abruptly stopped. Ashok froze. The demon knew he was here. The huge hut was big enough to house dozens of castless. Ashok's eyes couldn't quite pierce the shadows inside, but he knew that it was watching him. He knew the demon would look upon him and see a tall man, lean and hard, dressed in lamellar armor, plates lacquered grey and inlaid with silver, held together with leather and silk, not so different from some of the humans it had killed before, and hardly intimidating to something as strong as an elephant. Only, unlike the others, this man was completely devoid of fear. Something smooth and vast slid along the floor of the hut, blacker than its surroundings. There was a shimmer as a bit of firelight reflected off its nearly impenetrable hide. It didn't immediately barge into the open to try and eat him, as he had hoped. He'd surprised the last demon he'd fought by sidestepping its charge and opening its guts with Angruvidal. This demon was not so stupid. No. This demon recognized that this particular human was somehow different than the others. It understood that this human wasn't prey.
That was another entry in the complete audiobook serialization of Son of the Black Sword by Larry Correia. And that's it for the podcast. Thanks to Audible.com and to podcast theme composer Ruth Judkowitz. And the burnt-out ends of the smoky last days of a galaxy far, far away, but still smelling like cigarettes and whiskey 1 billion years later. And a distillation of starlight thanks and praise for Michael Z. Williamson, author of Tide of Battle. Please join us next time here at the hammering heart of science fiction and fantasy, and keep reaching for the stars.